Hi, so today we're going to go over some effective note-taking methods. My name is Madison, and I'm here with my coworker Lindsay, and we are undergraduate educators in the Collaborative Learning Center. And our goal is to record these workshops online for you so you can still access these resources even though we are all working from home right now. So just an outline of what we're going to do today. So we're going to start by thinking about what are your current methods for note-taking? Why is note-taking important? Identifying new methods such as outline, mapping, boxing, Cornell, and charting methods, and then going over strategies for using your notes before, during, and after class. So the outline method is a structured format intended to document linear content. It does not require fast writing skills, and you only write down the main points. So this is probably how a lot of people take notes. It's where you're just writing down the bullet points in a linear fashion, but it's really important to keep these structured and have kind of rules for yourself so that your notes are legible and it's easy to find information. So this is really good for classes such as history, English, social sciences, and sometimes natural sciences, but it's really hard to use for math and languages and things that aren't so straightforward in bullet pointed lists. So this is an example of kind of how you would use the outline method. So this is a main topic, subtopic, supporting facts. And you can see the structure with the dashes and the numbers and things like that, and it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but it's important to kind of have rules, or if you know that if I star something, that means it's a definition or anything that makes it stand out to you so that you're able to go back and find things in your notes and study them effectively. So this is really good if you're trying to take notes in a lecture that's live and you can't pause it and the slides aren't posted and you just have to get all the information down. The outline method is a good way to go. Next is the mapping method. This is a graphic representation of lecture content and course connections. This is useful when the lecture is dense but not necessarily linear, and it helps to create relationships by relating ideas. This is really suitable for any course, but it requires that you take all the ideas you've learned and kind of connect them. So if you have a class that kind of jumps around a bunch of different topics, but it all relates to one central idea, this is a good place to use the mapping method. It's also a good way to kind of study your notes or create notes that are easier to study from, because you can take things that are written in the outline method or take things that you have written on the slides of your notes and make course connections with them. So in the example here, it says applications of mind mapping, complex set of ideas, such as what you'll find in science and math. Useful for those who don't like to draw. So if you're not the kind of person that likes to draw out pictures or draw out figures, you can use a mind map to help figure out how things are connected. For those who are new to visual note-taking, so it's a good step to get you started incorporating visual methods into your note-taking process when you're unfamiliar with the subject matter and taking notes in real time. So you can always create a mind map and kind of just draw lines off of it, however anything fits to you, and then go back and organize it later if you need to. Okay, the boxing method is when you create focused groupings of ideas. This is really nice when you're taking notes electronically and helps with conciseness during fast-paced lectures. So I really like this if I'm trying to take notes on a tablet or I'm trying to condense my notes down if there's a lot of information and a lot of details. I like to use this to condense my notes down and help it get split up into manageable chunks. So if I know that this part is on cellular respiration and this part is on photosynthesis and these are the enzymes that I need to know, then that really helps me to organize it. And you can see in these pictures, you can't really see what they're saying, but it is kind of visual, and you can add different visual cues in there to help make the boxing method work best for you. So some subjects that this is most suitable for are math, natural sciences, and languages, but it can be hard to do with social sciences, English, and history because a lot of times these subjects have a lot of facts and those can be difficult to fit in the boxes. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Cornell method. And this is a very formulaic way of note-taking where you take notes in the note-taking area as usual during lecture, trying to skip a line between different topics. And then as soon as possible after lecture, you formulate questions that correspond with the notes and write them in the Q column. And then you review your notes and write a summary at the bottom of the page. So this definitely takes a little bit of time, and it's definitely something that you have to get used to if you choose to use it. But it's really important to stay on top of it, and it does force you to review your notes pretty frequently. in order to fill out the Q column and the summary column. So something that you could write in the Q column is like, why is blank important? And then in the note-taking area, you would have all the notes about the uses of whatever topic you're taking notes on. So it can be really helpful because then you can just fold the paper and look at the Q column and kind of use recall to figure out what you said in the note-taking area, as well as using the summaries to figure out what was important from each lecture or each page of notes. And then the charting method. So basically, this is just creating a chart and creating each column as part of your note-taking. So if you have a class where your professor is listing a bunch of different related topics or a list of a bunch of different things that you need to know, sorry, it may be easier just to create a chart from the start and take notes into that chart. So this one is talking about different search engines, and then comparing the URLs, advantages, disadvantages, and other notes. But it can be applied to any topic. You can do different theories in psychology. You can do different types of cells in biology. Basically anything you can think of. It's also a good way to organize your notes after you take them. So if you took all your notes in an outline format, but it's not really sticking, you can change it into the charting method in order to help your mind visualize the similarities and differences of each different thing.
Okay, so the next thing that we would have you all do in a workshop is pick the method you are least familiar with and write down pros and cons of that method, and then in which types of classes would you use this method. So referring to which types of classes, it could be subject content, lecture versus discussion-based classes, different types of things, depending on what type of class you're in. So just go ahead, take a minute, think about that, and then pause the video so that you can have time to write that down. Okay, the next thing we're going to have you do is make a list of each of your classes, write down which method would you use for each class and why. Think about how you can actually implement this into your coursework. So with the switch to online classes, note-taking is going to be more important because in a Zoom lecture, if it's like a Zoom lecture, so something you can't go back to, you're not going to have like a bunch of classmates to be able to reach out to, like right at your fingertips right after lecture to be like, hey, did you catch this slide? Or like, hey, did you catch this point? Or things like that. So it's going to be harder if you miss something. But if you have a lecture and your professor records it and then posts it online, like on D2L, that'll make it easier. So that can also influence what type of note-taking method you should use. So just go ahead and pause the video and then make a list of each of your classes and then write down which method you would use. And this can hopefully serve as like basically like a starting place for using these methods in your class, and it'll be kind of trial and error because you'll have to figure out which ones work for which class, and some might not work that you thought would work, and that's totally okay. Just start right now trying to figure out which ones you're going to use where. The next thing we like to talk about is before, during, and after class. Just some tips for note-taking. So the first thing to do before class is review notes from your previous lectures. This can be super helpful because if you have a good foundation of the class and you understand what happened in the last lecture or 2 lectures ago or 5 lectures ago, it can help you better understand what you're going to learn today in your class or your lecture. And then it can also help with transferring things to long-term memory rather than short-term memory, where you're going to lose that information before you even get to an exam or like have to write an essay or something like that. And then reviewing lecture slides for class if available. So this might to online, but if you have the ability to look at the slides before class, you'll definitely want to do that because then you can recognize different terms or different concepts, and when your professor goes over them in class, you'll remember like, oh hey, this is super important, I'll have to like get this down, or like I want to pay super careful attention right now. And then build both types of review into your schedule is also another thing that's important. Do any required pre-reading if assigned. So pre-reading is super important because it'll basically, just like reviewing lecture slides, give you like an outline for what the class should be doing. And then if it's a longer class and longer reading focused on like discussion-based learning, then the reading is super important because it'll basically like point you in the direction of how the entire class is going to go. And then if not, take 5 or 10 minutes to review the chapter you will cover. And then last but not least, make sure the seat that you choose will let you hear the lecture well So, while this normally applies to like in a lecture space, if you can get easily distracted, don't sit in the back, or if you need to sit the clock, make sure you can sit by a clock, or if you need to sit somewhere specific, make sure that you're sitting somewhere specific. But now since everything's online, this kind of translates to like pick an area of wherever you live or wherever you're doing your online classes that will be most beneficial. So if you live with a bunch of roommates and everyone is in the kitchen, usually at 10 o'clock in the morning, right when you're starting to do your 10:20 online class, maybe don't sit in the kitchen, sit in your room. Or if you have like a big family and you all meet up in the living room, maybe don't sit there. Just trying to think about where will be the best place for you to learn and where can you best focus. So if you'll get super distracted, if you just sit in your room, try to sit somewhere else, like a kitchen table or something like that. It just depends on where you'll focus best. And then during class, so a lot of times people will ask, how do you basically choose whether or not to listen more actively or if you should be taking notes? And this one's kind of hard because there's no like cut and dry answer. So it depends on each class. First thing that we write is determine how much you need to focus on what the professor is saying versus writing down. Always put the information in your own words. So if you're a person who learns really well from hearing people say things out loud, then you're probably going to want to actively listen more than you take notes. But if you're a person who has to write things down to understand the concepts, you're obviously going to want to write down your notes. And then we'll talk more about like focusing on what is important. But it just depends on like the professor, and you can like over the span of like a course, get better at understanding what works for you, but it kind of has to be trial and error. And then it's always recommended to put the information into your own words, because if you're just like rewriting exactly what the professor says, it might not make sense to you later, or it might not have clicked in the moment. So always make sure that you can put things into words that you understand. And then it depends on the subject and how much material. If the slides are posted online, that's a consideration. Things like that. And then what's important. So these are things to look out for during a lecture or during like a class. So the first thing would be introductory remarks. At the beginning of lectures, a lot of times professors will like just go over broadly what you're going to cover in class that day, and that can be really important because it'll basically like point out what you need to focus on. And then verbal signposts. So verbal signposts would be when a professor says like first, second, third, most importantly, things like that. Just like little signposts that'll point out that they're about to say something important, or they're about to say something like chronologically, they're going to say first, second, third, things like that. Or like in conclusion, all of those things can help identify like really important parts of lecture. And then repetition. If your professor goes over something again and again and again and like brings up a concept or brings up a term that you've already gone over in class, just know that that's going to be super important. And then cues. Those are more physical cues. So if you're doing a Zoom lecture where you can't see the professor, or it's just a recorded video kind of like this, you won't be able to see cues so much. So it's more about like noticing the inflection of a professor's voice and like trying to gauge that, but that can be definitely harder. So it's okay if you can't do that now that online classes are happening. And then if you can't see your professor, just notice like sometimes people will do like different gestures when something's super important, or turn a different way. In person, those are more applicable, but they can still work here. And then the last thing would be final remarks, including like in conclusion or like as a result. And then the last thing will be after class. The first thing is review, review, review a million times over. The more you review something, the more likely you are to lock it into your long-term memory, and then it'll help you with your future lectures because you'll have that like background information. Review frequently and consistently, and then review before and after class. Reviewing before class, as aforementioned, allows you to like reflect on what you already learned and remember what you already know. And then after class will help point out, one, if you missed anything, and if there's any like gaping holes in like what you're supposed to understand, you can be like, oh, I really need to email my TA or my professor or like a classmate because I need to figure this out. And it can also help like solidify that like you understand the concepts and you're doing well in the class, which will change how you study for the class or like the amount of time that you spend. And then fill in gaps, which is what I just mentioned. Determine if there are topics you don't understand and use a resource to get more info. Could be a textbook, professor, or friend in class. All of those things are super helpful. And then utilize notes as a study template. So after class, if you are a person that focuses a lot on taking notes and then you use some of the methods that Madison mentioned, that can be super helpful as a study template because you can create so many different studying tools on that. We have a different studying workshop too, if you're interested in like identifying how to translate notes into study materials. But notes can be super helpful, and they're not just for like in the moment writing things down to hold on to them. They can be used again and again and again, even in like classes that you go into in the future.